is just a small glimpse of what happened at Asbury University in February of 2023. Something that the world would go to call the Asbury Revival, whereas the university would later term the Asbury Outpouring. In fact, I'm making this video as a way to show what happened here from beginning to end, and to show that it was no simple spectacle, but the work of the Holy Spirit alone. So, I'm going to tell you guys how a small town in Kentucky of less than 6,000 people became home to an unusual outpouring of the Spirit that lasted for 16 days and nights, and which had thousands of people from all across the world come to see. My name is Logan. I go to Asbury Theological Seminary, right across the street from where all this started. I witnessed the whole thing from its spontaneous start in the Spirit, all the way till its conclusion. On top of this, I've spoken with leadership above me to fill in some spots of this story that most people might not even know about it. This all started Wednesday, February 8th, at Asbury University when students went to their morning chapel service at Hughes Auditorium. The university has chapel services every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so this was simply part of their normal routine. This being said, what followed this chapel would be anything but that. Some people were so moved by this service that they stayed after chapel just repenting and pouring their hearts out to God at the altar. The crazy part is that the guy who preached that morning for chapel said it was one of the worst messages that he had ever written. He knew it wasn't one of his best messages, but all he did was pray and hope that God could be able to use it nonetheless despite its faults. And little did he know just how much God would actually use it. These 20 or so students just never left the chapel. They just stayed and stayed and stayed, and eventually they texted their friends saying that they had to come to the chapel and experience what they had already been experiencing for hours. Not too long after all of this, the seminary that I attend had some students find out and want to go over and experience it as well, myself included. The day consisted of testimonies, worship, praying over one another, and this actually went through the entire night into the next day. In fact, this day and the days after it would look very similar to this. Just some university and seminary students sitting in a chapel, worshiping God, and a time marked by a sweet presence of the Spirit, unceasing worship, and short periods of testimonies. The seminary wanted to participate a bit more in this, so the next morning we opened our doors to our chapel, Estes, at 8 a.m., so that people on our side could also experience what they had been experiencing on the other side. This stayed around until about 2 in the afternoon, after which everybody on the seminary side went back over to Hughes to continue another night of worship over there. Again, this went through the entire night into the next day. Friday morning was met with some people coming in from the surrounding region, driving in to see what was going on. Some that I know of personally, a friend of mine from North Carolina and some of his friends from Tennessee, decided that they wanted to drive in to see what was coming on. On top of this, the university had an already scheduled chapel service for that morning, which they were able to incorporate into what was already going on very well. By Saturday night, Hughes had become so full of people from these two schools and from the surrounding region that we filled every single seat, about 1,400 to 1,500 seats. We filled the aisles, we filled the sides of the room, and we also filled the lobby with people just simply waiting to even get in. That's where I got this beautiful video. It was clear that this wasn't just students anymore, but people from outside coming in to see what was going on. Leadership became more involved because of this and started adding a bit more structure and adding things like strong biblical teaching and scripture readings to the services as well. At this point, the fire marshal had to get involved. You see, Hughes Auditorium is a fairly old building that definitely wasn't meant to handle this amount of people. They said that if we couldn't control the amount of people going in and filling up the balconies, that the balconies might actually fall in on themselves. So at this point, we had to control the amount of people who were coming into Hughes and find other places for them to go. To help with this, the next day, the seminary decided to open their chapel Estes for overflow from Hughes Auditorium. This also happened to be Super Bowl Sunday, where we believed things might begin to die down, but we were completely wrong about that. In fact, I went out to go see the Super Bowl myself that night with some friends, and upon coming back, I couldn't even find parking at my own building. As we went into the next week, starting on Monday, we consistently filled both Hughes Auditorium and Estes Chapel, meaning that we had to open other buildings for overflow as well, meaning that at this point, both the university and the seminary were completely involved in hosting this. And then we made it a full, continuous week of worship when Wednesday's chapel at Asbury University rolled around. At this point, the leadership and tech teams were becoming a bit overwhelmed due to non-stop hosting, staying day round to make sure that things were going okay. So they decided that come this night, they would give these people a break and allow them to go and close down the chapel so that people could get some rest. They didn't want it to stop completely, just that they would restart it the next morning. They expected that this would shut everything down, but there were some resilient students who actually stayed the entire night elsewhere and continued the worship. This would become more of a regular thing moving forward, where they would close the chapel down for the night so people could get some rest, and then come back the very next morning to continue what was going on. Things still continued to grow, and by this point we had Hughes Auditorium, Estes Chapel, and another chapel on our side called McKenna, completely full of people, along with a line that was beginning outside of Hughes Auditorium as well. By Friday morning, the line outside of Hughes Auditorium had grown to be this long, with only more people continuing to come in. At one point on this day, I was hosting sound in Estes Chapel, and it was asked how many people had come from outside of state, to which over half the people had raised their hands. As the weekend came around, Saturday only continued to grow. By this point, we had filled all three of the previously mentioned chapels, which was about 2,500 people. Our gymnasium and another church in the surrounding region also opened their doors for overflow as well. And on top of this, we had this many people outside that day. Sunday and Monday were the biggest days that this thing would see. Thousands and thousands of people filled these buildings and continued to flock outside the buildings as well. The police report we had said that 15,000 people came on these days alone. It was on this day, Monday, that the mayor of Wilmore had to get involved, shutting down entry to the city of Wilmore to non-residents and contacting the university asking them to open a public live stream and to move the events outside of the city because the city themselves were getting too overwhelmed with what was going on. You see, this weekend we had actually taken up every single parking spot in the entire city. Whereas leadership was initially concerned about welcoming the world into their living room, they complied with the live stream request, and after prayer decided that the best thing to do was to announce that they would no longer host events after the Thursday night collegiate day of prayer service, which was an event that was scheduled a year in advance. They knew that the fruit that had come from this had already began to spring outward, and that them closing their doors would certainly not be an end to this movement. This being said, lots of people still continued to show up Tuesday through Thursday this week, continuing to come from all around the country and all around the world. This all concluded with the Collegiate Day of Prayer service Thursday evening, a truly beautiful way for the 16 straight days of worship to come to a close at Asbury University. But this isn't to say that it's over. Just because the movement isn't happening here anymore does not mean that the movement is finished. People have taken what they have found here back to their hometowns and are inviting the Spirit to move there as well. In fact, those were some of the final words said at Asbury University Thursday night. You see, the university and the seminary didn't ask for any money or resources for this. They used their own time and money to keep it going, and people would continually ask them, "How can we thank you for doing this?" To which they responded, "You can thank us by taking what you have found here back to where you came from." People came from all over the nation and all across the globe just to see what the Spirit was doing in this small town in Kentucky. People from nearly every state in the US, and people from countries like Canada, Chile, Uganda, Singapore, Indonesia, and even India flew to come see what was going on here. Even though the outpouring here has seemingly ended, the fruits of this have already begun. Churches and colleges all across the nation have started their own continuous worship sessions, and people have found new life in God that they are taking back to their hometowns as well. Not only this, but people have seen this online, on social media, and in the news, and have been moved as well. The couple that flew in from Chile told us that the movement spread across all of South America, and that was the only reason they came here, was to tell the university what was going on there. Many people have found Christ for the first time here and across the globe because of what happened at Asbury University. And many more people have rediscovered their love for Christ and were rejuvenated to live a God-led life moving forward. Although this outpouring has received criticism from people on the outside, saying things like how it was fake, not Spirit-led, and only spectacle, I promise you, as someone who saw the whole thing through, that it was anything but this. Were there some people who came only for spectacle and popularity? Sure. There's no stopping that. But the service was completely spontaneous, not planned. It was Spirit-led from the beginning to the end. There were no fog machines, no fancy lights, no big speakers. In fact, we actually turned down numerous big speakers so that the focus could still be on God and not on the people coming in. Instead, this was thousands of people from around the globe pouring their hearts out to Jesus, worshiping him, being on fire for him, and for hundreds, finding God for the first time. The focus was always on Jesus and what he was doing in this place, not on the music and the people. People found Jesus in this place, people found new life in their faith in this place, and people have taken what they found here out into the world to give what they themselves have found. Thank God for what happened in this place, and may this outpouring continue to grow fruit well into the future.